Hey everyone, welcome to another On This Day in Canadian Military History live stream. This one is something I've been excited to talk about because I literally finished the book this morning and got lots of thoughts and excited to ask some questions of our guest today. So we have Charlotte Duval-Lantoine, who's coming to talk about the book. And I had to keep the page up to remember the title because it's a bit of a mouthful, but that's not a problem. I just can't remember titles very well. The Ones We Let Down, Toxic Leadership Culture and Gender Integration in the Canadian Forces. To say that this book was eye-opening is an understatement. I mean, I knew about the topics that are covered in this because it's not just, again, Charlotte can talk about this, and I'll probably ask her probably a couple of times, but it's not just gender integration in and of itself. There's a lot going on here, and it's done very, very well. So I'm really excited to have Charlotte on here to talk about it. So we'll just get this going and come what may, and as always, post questions and comments whenever you like. I will do the best to get them all facilitated and taken care of real quick. So, hey, Charlotte, thanks for joining us. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me today.
Oh, yeah, no problem. I'm so glad you reached out about this book because I heard about it a while ago from somebody. Maybe it was from you on Twitter. I can't remember. I talk to so many people now. And it's an interesting idea. And we'll get into, like I said, about it and all of that. Just as I always ask, and as I already told you, how do you get here? I mean, we were discussing, like, no one's talked about this, particularly this time period, right? Because it's fairly recent. I mean, for most people, some people who are watching may have gone through this. So how did you come to this topic? I don't know how to frame that. Just how'd you get here?
So I got into grad school under very chaotic circumstances, but we'll pass that one. And I worked under Desmond Morton during my undergrad. I did a class with him, and for that class, I wrote something about Vimy Ridge and Juno Beach. And why Canadians cared more about Vimy Ridge and Juno Beach, because as a French person, I found this crazy. I did not understand. But when I came to my to grad school with this idea, Dr. Alan English, my supervisor, was like, public history. Was like, no, man, I want to work in defense and security. So like, this is not working out for me. So I was like, okay, what's going on with women in the military? Because like, this is a topic that we don't really talk about. And in terms of history, I've only heard about the nursing sisters.
Right.
And so he gave me like some kind of bibliography, and in that bibliography, there was the thesis, the PhD dissertation rather, of Karen Davis, who is a researcher at Defense Research and Development. And she talks about gender integration from the Royal Commission on the Status of Women, which kind of started that opening, and up until 1999. And I was like, wait a second, we have a court order that says women are getting integrated. And at the same time, and giving an order for the military to reach full gender integration by 1999. But at the same time, we have the decade of darkness happening. Like, this is like, you're going right into this. There's the Somalia Affair. And I'm like, those things do not happen in isolation. Like, like, history is messy. So like, you cannot see one thing as separate from the other. And I found that we were not talking about this when we were talking about the decade of darkness. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to bring the two together and see what comes of it. And this is where I'm at.
Yes, so that's great. I just want to just go back to your comment about Vimy and Juno. You're not the first person, the French person, to tell me that. How many people I've heard talk about that, and multiple people from France or grew up in France saying, why Vimy? Where even is that? And they're like, Normandy's the big deal, but okay.
Or the Somme, or like where my family grew up, Valenciennes, Landrecies, Lille, and all that stuff. To us is very important, but Vimy, especially that you like lost it about 48 hours later. Like, we were just like, we learned the date at school in middle school. So it just like, I knew the date, I knew about Vimy like very vaguely, because you have to learn all the dates of the First and Second World War.
Don't do that here.
but like, don't recommend it. Like, it's useless. And so yeah, we're just like, and I was talking to my Canadian friends. I was like, I have to do something for my Canadian military history class. Like, let's talk about like how you remember stuff.
Mm.
And they were like, yeah, Vimy Ridge. And I was like, wait a minute. This is a date I haven't heard since 2010. So, and it was 2016 at the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was curious about that.
Yeah.
And it was
Anyway.
a cool project, but not grad school, like not leading me to where I wanted to be.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about that forever. I have lots of thoughts on this. As many people know, I've watched the channel before and on Twitter, so I'm not going to talk about that anymore. But just to say, you're not the first one to think that or say that to me. So, yeah, so this idea of talking about the gender integration, I mean, it's like you said, it's a long process. Again, anything I say is not because Charlotte told me to say it or anything, as you guys know. I'm just like to throw out the disclaimers. It's all my own opinion, but it's still a mess, and there's so much. Sorry.
You think?
You think I know? I don't think I know. Anyway, but your book is great in that it provides more context. Like you said, it's like it's and as you explained in the book a little bit, some of this stuff is not accessible. Some of the sources because of reasons that you talk about in the book indirectly. But I'm a historian. I get it how it works. There's some stuff I want to look at that's still sensitive. That's 80 years old, and they won't let me look at it. So it's weird. But anyway, with that said, the thesis, if that's okay, if I can kind of give it away. But everyone, like I've been saying for the last 3 days, you shouldn't get this book. It's eye-opening. There's a link below to buy it. It's not out yet. It's in May, right? Early May?
I got an update from my publisher. It's very likely May 22nd.
Okay, cool.
There has been some delays in the production, obviously.
Okay, well, long weekend around then. So there you go. We got some reading over the long weekend for everybody. So that's soon. That's soonish. Good enough. It'll be here in a blink. Anyway, so the thesis, how did you get there? Was it like something you had in mind when you started? Did you develop this as it moved along? Because it's so powerful in a sense. I mean, and I had a supervisor when I did my MA way back when saying like the really good theses are when the ones that are like you sit and you go, oh yeah, I guess that makes sense. Like you hadn't really heard of it before, but then you go and you think about it for a second, you go, all right, yeah, I guess that is the way it is, kind of thing, or that's why it happened. And that's what I got from yours. So how'd you get there?
So I was smart and lucky enough to take a year-long class with my supervisor on military history. And like I read his book, which is Understanding Military Culture. And there was another small book that was very interesting called Tarnished by George E. Reed.
Yep.
That kind of like sets out like the basics of toxic leadership. So I read that for class. And the more I was getting into my own research, like reading a bunch of different theses, different newspapers, articles, dissertations, and stuff like that, I was like, okay, this is textbook. At this point, this is textbook. Like I was reading Reed and just like checking the marks. And so like that was for like this. So for this class, since it was year long, it was 2 term papers, and I focused the second term paper on like the impact of all those policies. And it came to be like I didn't have any idea of where I was going at all.
Oh, okay.
When I started, it was just like very much shot in the dark because I was struggling to just find anything that was history related, because that history is so poorly understood. So I had to like go outside of like the traditional history sources and go into newspapers and go into master's thesis to really find where that argument lies. And also I was lucky enough to meet some of the people that wrote those studies. And so like having those studies, because I could not access them from outside, like from library and archives and stuff like that. So like having that person, Rosemary Park, giving me this to me, and then like having the chance to have conversations with her, like really like moved me towards that direction. And also at the same time, when I arrived in grad school, it was 2017. So Operation Honor was very nascent. And so I was like, and the Me Too movement exploded.
Right.
And I was also like in the middle of those conversations, because I don't think that you write history without a context too.
Oh,
And,
yeah.
and so those discussions like really led me into this part of like, yes, this is gendered, but there is a problem of organizational culture that like goes at the root. And so and it helped me also going through the arguments that people were making about the decade of darkness writ
Right.
large, to really articulate this argument.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense, especially having just like, because it's so fresh in my mind. That makes sense in that, because again, that's another thing I appreciate about your book, and something I'm really starting to like in different ways people are doing history is talking about, you know, what that means, how they got there, like who they talk to, how they go about it. Like usually it's like a footnote or something, but if it's understood that it's important for us to know, especially when it's an academic press book. So this is all fair game. You can do that. It's great to know, right, what goes into it and who goes into it, right? Who's part of all of this. That's great. Now there's a lot of terminology here that a lot of people might not be familiar with, and a lot of events they might not be familiar with. Could you kind of give us a rundown of the major events about gender integration, and then we can go from there, if you could, just real briefly, about some of the bigger events and, you know, as the operations, as they call them.
Yeah, so I'm trying to decide which order. I'm gonna start with the Decade of Darkness, because there is some competing understanding of it. So for most of the defense community, the Decade of Darkness relates to the budget cuts that started around the Mulroney era in around like 85, but that really accelerated around 94 under the Chrétien administration. And this led to just a bleeding of personnel and lack of procurement processes in the military. But a lot of social scientists that delve a little bit more into this also define the Decade of Darkness as what happened during it. So we had a lot of Canadians that committed war crimes. The most notable one would be the killing of Shidane Aron in Somalia, but Somalia was defined by a lot, actually several killings of civilians, some accidentals, some the jury's still out on it. Shidane Aron is like the only one where we know that it was, well, tortured to death. And so that led to a watershed moment in the military, where we had several studies, a huge public commission of inquiry, scathing report that is of over 1,000 pages that I read 3 times in a year. I do not recommend it. That gave me nightmares. So there's that. And in the middle of, and then you have the Bakovici scandals, you have Rwanda that led to questioning of how we treat our military personnel when it comes to mental health issues. You had the, and I did not mention that in my book, but still fairly important. In 1992, you have the end of the LGBT purge within the Canadian Civil Service, where at that time you had RCMP and military police that were persecuting anyone that worked for the government of Canada for being non-hetero, cisgender heterosexual. And in the middle of that, in February of 1989, you have the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal that tells the military, okay, you have not proved that gender is a bona fide occupational requirement. You need to fully integrate women in the military in 10 years. Never defined what full integration meant, even though they gave some idea. And it's also, and when you take into account like all those budget cuts, all those war crimes, all those difficult deployments and stuff like that, you end up with like the cluster mess. I don't know if I can swear on this channel, so if you get monetized, I don't want you to get demonetized.
Yeah, they'll lock the, they'll restrict the video. Yeah.
It ends up being the perfect storm for the military and also for the failures of gender integration. Because if you think that right now the military is struggling with culture change, imagine what it was 30 plus years ago. And they haven't we can like have a conversation about like what it means for today, but like this is like this huge context in which you find yourself.
Yeah, we'll talk about. I want to talk about that toward the end,
Okay.
and I want to come back to Somalia because I think it's really interesting how you go about looking at this and your conclusions. Again, I don't want to give too much away, but your conclusions are kind of mind blowing in that sense. Again, it was one of those, oh yeah, like, oh yep, that's perfect. That makes perfect sense. Like I'm just like, why didn't I think of this? You know, like why has nobody else made this kind of connection? So sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, some of the connections, like I was sitting, and because I learned about Somalia before I knew I wanted to go in that direction, and Somalia is something that I've always heard about, like even when I was in France, but I didn't know what was happening because Canada is not the only country to have its own scandal related to Somalia. Like you have the Belgians and the Italians as well. And then when I saw the names, and then saw the names repeated in my own study of gender integration, I was like,
yeah. Things happen, and that's not, again, that's a lot of the military for you. That came up in my own work. It is not as like in this type of as important. I'm just gonna use the word importance as yours, but it's just like I'm just like the names that come around again. I'm just like, this is why you're doing this. Like, in my work, you're dead, but I caught on to what you were trying to do. But it's just that's another thing that was really interesting to me is because, and I want to talk about that towards the end. But again, the impacts this has today is undeniable,
right?
But that said, can you you mentioned briefly the decision that led to this that really, I guess you could say, I don't want to use the word like officially, but kicked off the process where there's an actual legal requirement.
I call it formal.
Yeah, whatever that means towards the military, which usually means nothing, unfortunately, in this country. And that, again, is not new, because that's not the first time that happened. It's really interesting. Can you just talk about how that case kind of briefly came up and how the government got to that place?
Oh, so it's actually a long history, but usually people tend to say that it starts around 1960 when you have the Royal Commission on the Status of Women that is calling for equal access of women into the military. And just as a quick aside, like a lot of people do not understand the reason for which we have that opening of the military for women. And so the wave of feminism that we're seeing at that time is a liberal feminism. That is to say, give access to women to the same institutions that are male-dominated and the same access, and that would allow women to be full citizens in practice. And so this is kind of what motivated opening the military to women as well, because Canada has been shaped by the idea of the soldier citizen, right?
Yes.
So we start with that. We see an opening of certain what we would call traditional occupations to women. So clerical work, nursing comes back as something that women can serve in the same way that men can, which is something that was shut down after World War II. To give men more access to the labor market. I mean, let's not make a presentist feminist argument about the past, but sometimes it's mind-boggling.
I just want to jump in real quick because I don't even know when that was now, in February. I don't know. Time to me right now is all over the place because I got so much coming up. Anyway, so I had Kelly Thompson on in February.
Yeah. Oh my God, Kelly is amazing.
Yeah, she's great writer. I'm like still waiting for her next book to come out, and she's got one coming out even later. So I'm excited for those. Regardless, I knew I was going to go off on a tangent if I had stopped myself. But the idea, this came up again before about just not even. How do I say that's not even making about any arguments with any kind of label on that. I'm just like, the numbers of people who identify male and female is roughly, again, it's usually half and half, right? It's usually rough parity in population, right? Give and take a few percentage points for people who identify as something different. Why are we cutting off half of our population?
And Canada is super interesting in this case because we have. So obviously those statistics are not taking into account like non-binary people. But like it's 51% women.
Yeah. Yeah.
Guys,
I'm just like,
we need to give access. Like,
it makes
if
no
you,
sense. Like, if you want to strip it down to its bare, you want to take this down to a logical level, that numbers just make no sense.
it makes absolutely no sense.
It's
And
nonsense.
it's insane. So you see some opening to women, and then you have the Canadian Human Rights Act.
Yes.
What it does is create a bona fide occupational requirement.
Mm-hmm.
So any person that wants to bar a certain demographic from entering a certain occupation, they need to have a bona fide requirement.
Yep.
So there's that 1976. So by that time, like, women are continuing to enter the military, and we can talk about a little bit of the irony of having a court case compared to those laws that opened the military a little bit more to women. Then you have the Charter of Rights and Freedom that kind of contradicts actually the Canadian Human Rights Act, in the sense that, like, Section 15 says there should be no reasons for discrimination.
Right.
But the military is kind of like given the exception, because it is always given the exception. So you have that.
Mm-hmm.
So under those two principles, you have 5 individuals, if I remember well, because I have not read my book just this morning. I spent like more than 4 years in my face in it. So every time I can avoid reading it, I do that. Maybe not the best idea, but you have a few individuals. So you have Joseph Holden, like you have 2 Browns, and you have Gautier. Yeah, actually there's 6, and then like a couple of people, McRae. So anyway, they're like, okay, this is unfair. This does not represent. This is not in line with the law. This is not in line with the rights. And actually, the first person that came to a complaint to the Canadian Human Rights Commission was a man, saying that the fact that women are not held liable under the unlimited liability, which means that they can be ordered into harm's way, that is to be ordered to their death, is discriminatory against men. Which is kind of ironic that this is a man that opened this can of worms, but he has a point.
He does.
Like, if you want to make everyone equal, like, you need to take into account those things. And so, like, that some complainants go into settlement because the reasons for which they were barred from the military was actually against the rules of the military. But so in 1989, the tribunal decides, okay, you're gonna open everything but submarines. Submarines, because of the private quarters and the promiscuity, were barred until 2001, when the Canadian Armed Forces were like, okay, we're gonna open this.
Yeah, can I stop you right there and ask about that? I'm not a submariner. I've never been in the military. I've been on one that's now a museum, the Ojibwe, which is down in Port Burwell, Ontario, which is kind of cool.
Oh, the Ojibwe. Yeah.
If you're ever there, it's cool to check out. I mean, I was super claustrophobic because I'm 6'3" and barely fit in a normal house. So
yeah. I mean, I'm 5'11", and just the idea of going into
it was not comfortable.
When you're 6'3",
I'll just stop there. But my question is, because you looked into this, right? And again, I don't know, depending on who's watching, and maybe people are watching later can leave comments below if they did serve or know people who served in these submarines. I don't understand the difference between a surface vessel and a submarine in terms of privacy. Do they discuss what that even means?
So in the court case, they don't, but
of course not.
What the military? So the surface vessels were big enough so that they could have a quarter with the little women, like little number of women that they had.
Yeah, like so
they had like enough space to create like some bunk beds for like the 3 women that were there when they finally let them on, right?
So like literally a separate space.
Yeah, they have literally separate spaces. Yeah. So that is the difference. And like a lot of people are scratching their head around submarines, but France still has this belief that women cannot go in a submarine because if they happen to be pregnant, it's bad for the baby. And so, like, better to bar women altogether than taking the risk of a woman, like, discovering she's pregnant aboard a submarine. yeah. So the fact that like the tribunal was like like
okay.
I don't want to impose intent or stuff that I don't know about
Right.
the people on the tribunal, but to what extent were they aware that like if integration did not happen well on a submarine, that could have led to a shit show. And this could be a question that someone will have had in 89. And considering the stories that I'm talking about, including toxic environments on the Ojibwe,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
We don't talk about that at the museum.
kind of like, oh, maybe it was not too bad. So yeah, but to go back to that court case, what I found super interesting is that they used a case that established a two-pronged test to determine whether an occupational requirement was bona fide,
right.
Whether it is objectively proven and whether it is subjectively proven. That is to say, do people believe that, right, in this case, sex and gender prevent someone from doing the job, and whether or not that is true. So the Canadian forces during like between 76 and 85, when the court case started, did some trials known as the Swinter trial. So it's service women in non-traditional employment, something.
Yeah, I can't remember.
Yeah, there's an R. They love their acronyms.
Oh, so many.
And so like in those trials, they're like, oh, we found that women are not able to do the same job as men. And it's like, but they're not taking into account that like leadership is important in helping the integration of women. They compare orange and to apples because they take very well integrated and very competent male units and compare it to women that were just put in the job just for those trials.
Yes.
When someone is not as well trained, obviously they're not going to be as effective, correct?
Yeah.
So but the trials, like when you dig actually deeper into this, and Paula Trachy did that amazing job of during her master's thesis, like looking into this, is that the studies didn't say that women actually failed. It just said we need more work to like better integrate women, better train them, and actually like change some of the conditions in which women will serve and not evaluate them on male-based standards.
Right.
But because the military was believing so much that gender was an occupational requirement, that they said it's not worth the trouble. And so like this is one of the things that the tribunal recognizes, is that okay, that was not proven, but we cannot deny the fact that the military actually believes in this. And so they did not make that explicit, but it's something that I say in my book, is that the tribunal kind of like sowed the seeds for a conversation about culture change, because they talk about that subjective aspect of whether or not women are able to serve.
Right. Well, we had a sorry, just someone jumping in about the submarine thing. So just give me 1 second. Yeah, I know you can probably see it, but I'll pull it up here. I mean,
Keith, I like that comment.
That's good. Yeah, that's good, Keith. Thanks for popping in there. I mean, well, you explained not the nitty and gritty of that particular one. It's just that not because of your work specifically, because I've heard about it before, obviously, and I'm just like, okay. I mean, it's all uncomfortable. It's the military. It's not meant to be comfortable. This isn't a lounge chair job here. Like, this is going to be uncomfortable in most circumstances. Anyway, so that's a good point. I think that's probably one of the arguments that was made. I've heard that too, right? That the lack of privacy and this whole other question I wanted to ask, and maybe this is a good time to talk about it, is this, again, these things that I don't even know who to say they, but because that's part of your book, right? Like, who's the they causing the problems? And again, I don't want to give that away yet. I want to talk about that specifically, but because that's what your book does so well, is, you know, these attitudes, right? That they come against, that women come against, that these men and some other women form. And I'm just like, that doesn't make any sense. Like the whole sexual promiscuity thing.
I mean,
I don't get it. It doesn't make any sense.
to me, it's kind of weird because like I have a twin brother, so I was like around boys all the time, and I evolved in male-dominated environment. I've started learning how to box about 6 years ago, and I was in male-dominated environments that were like oozing hyper masculinity and like doing all of those push-ups and like also like touching each other all the time because like we're punching each other in sweat and it's like 40 degrees in the gym, and it was never weird like that. Like it was never there is a specific boxer that I could talk about for like hours that made it weird, but he just known for that. But otherwise, like there was no problem like that. There was promiscuity, but like if leaders are worried about promiscuity, it's their problem. Like if they think that the vibe is weird, then it's theirs to rectify. I just don't understand why people are so weirded out. Like you can be around men and women and not making it sexual. Like you know, you're in combat, guys. Like you might be horny, but like at some point everyone has to sleep and like be in the same tent. Like
well, I mean, I mean, you're right, and that makes me think of, because I was thinking about that too, right? Because I'm a thinker, I guess, because of the whole PhD thing, I suppose. I guess that's what it does to a person. Because I was just thinking about other examples. Because a while back, I don't remember where I found it. Anyway, I was reading some articles about men who identified as homosexual in the Second World War. It was in the American military, I think, just generally, and they're talking about that because like they were some people like. Because this interview was from a long time ago, and they're like, indirectly and kind of in a rude way, they're like, "Were you just horny all the time?" And he's like, "No, I was getting shot at and hungry and tired. I don't care."
Yeah, I don't think that in a war. I mean, like, you know, I think it has something a lot to do with like the way that we conceptualize a warrior. And how we have embraced an idea of what women are for in a war. You know, like sexual gratification, token of war, like looting and stuff like that. And it's just like, if we had addressed that from the very beginning, I'm not saying that everything will have been rosy, but like being aware that and the fact is that like the military was aware of those tropes, and that was why they were against integrating women, but they decided not to address it when women had to be integrated. They were like, oh no, it's their problem. Like a lot of like individual responsibility in the military, which is very weird in such a collective organization. It's like now it's your problem. You have to deal with those issues, and it's like no, and I think that like. If we had like, and the military is trying to come to grips to that finally today, where it's like, okay, we need a warrior ethos, we need a fighter spirit, which it can be argued. I could have a conversation about this, and I had conversation with people that were like, "You're wrong," but I kind of think that like the military as a whole doesn't need the entire fighting spirit. Like you can instill it in very specific units that actually do combat, which are the minority. But like that is a hot take in the defense community. But yeah, if you had like there is a sense of self-awareness that you can see throughout the book, where people are kind of like tuned in to like some of the aspects of their ethos that actually motivate their opposition to women's integration, but there is no addressing it, and I find that there is a certain cognitive dissonance around it.
And I mean, sorry, I completely agree, because just the way you laid it out and the things I've done in my own work and studying and reading things. I did want to ask though, in terms of that, because that warrior ethos, right, being hyper, like you used the language like hyper masculine, like aggressive, all of these things, and I'm just wondering, like, has there been work done on that specific part of that, like the gendered element and what that has to do, not necessarily with, I guess integration is probably the best word, right? I assume that's why you picked it, is, yeah, and how that fits, right? Like in other examples, because again, and this is more presentism, but I do think it applies because women have been fighting in wars just as long as men have. Women have been killing people on the battlefield too. I mean, that's just undeniable. But in terms of like what people have thought about that, how they look at that, because there are so many examples where that just it's not true. This whole warrior ethos. I mean, and I have another question about the leading from that. But like, has people like argued that that isn't? I guess I'm more asking from an academic like standpoint, like what that even, how they got there, what that means. Like, I don't really understand it, to be honest.
So the military is having a hard time grappling with this, but there is a long swath of feminist theory around this.
Right.
You like look at Cynthia Enloe to start with, but even in Canada, you have more recent like people that are still alive and still doing this work to this day. Nancy Taber, Maya Aichler, who has written articles that are actually like regendering the military. Victoria Tate, that is now a researcher at Defense Research and Development Canada, whose thesis, PhD dissertation is around all of this. So we have that academic understanding of like the warrior ethos is bullshit, or like it's based on outdated tropes. The problem is that we have not academics, and it's something that now that I'm becoming someone involved in the public discourse, because last year I was thrown into that and did over 100 interviews in like 6 months about the sexual misconduct scandal.
Okay, that's news to me, but okay, wow, that's a lot.
I was very tired, to say the least. But we have a hard time telling the military, okay, what do we do in actuality to address that, like the gendered aspect and the white also aspects of the warrior ethos.
Right.
And to me, it would start simply like just review the physical standards that you impose on people to get into the military. Like, tell me, to what extent do I need to do 50 push-ups to be an effective soldier? Right. Like, women have a lower upper body strength, but they have better lower body strength and better endurance. That is an asset in a war when you have to walk for hours.
Yep.
So like, do people in combat arms, like you're in Afghanistan, you see a Taliban and you just drop 5 and see like who does like, I just wondered, why don't we have a more skill-based kind of training, like working balance for the Navy, for example, and like carry for the Army. And also, we don't really talk about the effect of adrenaline on physical performance during a war. Like we have seen women like being in a car accident and being able to flip a car to save their children. Like, they are capable, but we have not talked about like those kind of issues. Or like, I talk about the Clothe the Soldier program in my book. To this day, women still don't have the shoes that are fitted for their like specific physiological needs, and because of that, you have a larger number of women that leave the military for medical reasons than men do, because of the musculoskeletal injuries that they create.
Right. And I guess that's, again, it's just the same way that I like talking about. I would have to talk about Kelly Thompson earlier. It's just half the time the questions I wanted to ask her, and then I'm like, I know the answer. I know what she thinks in that sense because I read the book and everything, talking about the stories. But I'm just like, it's just like mind blowing. That just makes no sense. I think, and I just wanted to put a quick little anecdote to someone, because Twitter can be a cesspool, as we all know. Someone was talking about how like small, like some women are smaller. I mean, some women are bigger than some men. It's undeniable. But like how like these, we couldn't, I'm 225 and ripped. You couldn't lift me on a battlefield. And then someone posts a picture of Audie Murphy. That guy won every medal that the United States gave. He was like 5'4" and weighed like 100 pounds. Like, he was a tiny dude, and he's the most decorated soldier in U.S. history. And people are just like, yeah, okay, he was a wimp. He shouldn't have been in the military. Like that's just, it doesn't make any sense.
As someone that was in boxing, and this is also like my experience in such a male-dominated and hyper-masculine field that influenced my book and my understanding of like gender requirements in terms of physical aptitude.
Right.
I used to spar with my 225 best friend, and I gave him bruises, and I was 110 at the time. I was tiny, and I'm still pretty much are. I'm tall, but like I'm tiny, but I'm faster. And I can punch because I learned the proper technique. So I kind of think that if we give all of those options for women to actually like learn the proper techniques to do some things, or like, okay, like you will not necessarily like need to do like 5 push-ups in a row, pull-ups in a row, but at least know how to do one, because that might be useful. But usually what happened in those kind of situations is that, yeah, you will need to know the proper technique to do one pull-up, and you will have to do one. But I don't think that like you will find yourself in a position where you just have to like do like 12 pull-ups in a row in a battlefield.
That's not gonna happen.
Because like if you find yourself in this situation, it's like, what is happening? You're not taking the best route for you to like go somewhere, you know. And like teaching climbing and teaching like running, like endurance running and all that kind of stuff is way more useful, because you're going into skills based and teaching technique rather than like pure like male-based performance, because this is how sports also are created. That comes also from an entire cultural issue of like inequity in terms of access to sports and the type of sports that the military rewards, and the type of physical performance that the military rewards, you know. And so like these are all those barriers that are informed by the warrior ethos, and that reinforces the warrior ethos on top of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great connection to make, because again, that's pretty much how I think about it in terms of that. Now, and you're getting great points, great feedback. Rachel was very good point. She's just like, that is a perfect point. I mean, it made me, and it connects to something I did want to ask.
Yeah.
Because a couple days ago, I was, I don't know, I do this. I sometimes go on Twitter and accidentally start a fight. I was looking at, I'm sure you've seen that. I was looking at some video because I wanted to start doing some more Normandy stuff. I found a video of Michael Whitman, the Nazi, Panzer commander who got blown to pieces at Totalized. Anyway, I found the oral history that the Imperial War Museum has of one of the gunners who was credited with taking him out. In his interview, he's talking that he wanted to be in the Armored Corps because he didn't want to run. He's like, I don't want to do any of that. And I went, that's smart. I mean, it sounds like those tanks back then sounded like death traps to me. But anyway, what my question, and kind of leading from that, because I was reading your book, I think at the same time as when I started it, and I want to get your sense of this. You might not even have an answer to this, but particularly in the context you're looking at, right? 1990s Canadian military. There's deployments. I'm not denying that. There's danger. Not denying that. The peacekeeping missions were anything from peaceful.
Peacekeeping, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to get into that because we could talk about that for hours. Anybody, I could just go on forever. My question is, that's technically peacetime, right? War, to me, as a military historian, is militaries in war are different than militaries in peacetime. That's my opinion. If you want to eviscerate me in the comments, go ahead. But I'm just getting the sense that a lot of these barriers that are put in place, are deep-seated misogyny. I get that. But sometimes, because I honestly feel like in peacetime, militaries are trying to justify their own existences in a lot of ways. So they just do all these things just to do them, right? All these physical requirements, all this paperwork, all this different attitudes. And I just feel like they're doing their own selves harm by doing this. Did you get a sense of that? Or
I absolutely agree. My job is amazing in that sense, because I'm part of so many conversation about defense and security, like not only on the Canadian military forces side, but also the larger Canadian government side and industry. Right. And what I'm seeing is that the Canadian military today, but I think that in the 1990s, with the end of the Cold War, it was more acute.
Right.
We have militaries that don't know how to be in peacetime.
Right.
and so they behave, and in a way it's not wrong. They're behaving as if like a war could explode at any time,
Right.
which is like kind of true. Like we're talking about Ukraine right now, but like there's so many wars going on in the world. It's just like Canada decides not to get involved in those.
Yeah.
So like at any moment the military can be sent to war. It's just that the military in Canada, at least in Canada, because I haven't studied the other ones,
Mm-hmm.
do not understand that one will never. It's very unlikely that we're going to see a war to the same scale as World War II and World War One.
Yep.
Let's be honest, like even if we call what's going on in Ukraine World War III, it's never going to be the same scale where you have to like recruit everyone that is of military age. And so because of that, there is like those tensions of like, yeah, in times of budget cuts, having to defend themselves and defend their relevance and defend their operational effectiveness. And usually what happens is, you're right, they take gendered arguments because that's all they know. And particularly in a time where women were trying to get into this, into service and to serve equally. And you see this even to this day, especially in the United States, where you have Fox News and other conservative outlets. And I'm taking Fox News because like they're the more blatant about this, but I've seen these arguments in Canada too during the sexual misconduct scandal, saying, well, look at us, like now that we have women in our military, we have so many of those problems, and the more we let women in, the more we feminize our military, and this is why the Russians don't take us seriously. And I'm just like, the Russians never took you seriously.
Yeah, they don't.
Like,
they think we're a bunch of jokes anyway, regardless of what gender we may identify as or any of that. They don't care.
The United States like let women in combat arms after the invasion of Crimea. So like, no, it's not women that led. Russia is very good at. Russia is very good at exploiting gendered aspects of our societies. Like they're very attuned to our culture and playing those tropes because of their own the hypermasculinity of their societies. But no, it's not a motivator. That being said, when you're dealing with organizations that are operating at a time that they're not used to and they are highly insecure, usually who takes the brunt, it's minorities. And so like the things I'm talking about, even though they're like tuned specifically to the experience of women, let's not forget that this is more acute for people of color, and particularly women of color that are kind of absent from any forms of military history, at least in Canada.
In Canada specifically. Oh yeah, I 100% agree. It's complete. Yeah, I mean, it's just like you said, systematic. I don't know the word, tactical. Down to the everyday, I guess, attitude level. Anyway, that. Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. It's to me, it's such nonsense, and I can't not connect everything to history because that's just who I am. But it's so funny, right? Because Russia, the successor to the Soviet Union. Soviet Union was using, I don't know how many women in combat roles in the Second World War. Some of the most, some of the highest kill count snipers in the history of humanity were Soviet women. They killed hundreds of German soldiers on the Eastern Front.
But like it's very weird because like communism, and we're gonna go for a tangent quickly, but communism was like such a supportive, like quote unquote supportive of women as like full participants of society, and you saw the same thing in China.
Yeah.
But then you had as after Mao's death, you see a rollback of all those advances for women in China, and like when you look at Eastern Europe and how like the means to like distantiate themselves from their traumatic past with communism, they go into right the opposite end.
Yeah, exactly.
And you end up with like, even though they had like that glorious integration of women, I mean, we don't know the details, but like women were active participants and were themselves war heroes in the Second World War for the Soviet Union. You're gonna have a pushback just because of the trauma that that time period caused for the populations.
Yeah, it's connected, but I usually use that as the argument because I've literally heard people being like, and you talk about it in your book, right? We already talked about the physical stuff, but being also we touched on it a little bit, but like, what do they call it? Like the aggressiveness to actually do it, and I'm just like,
let me tell you, if someone is put in a situation where they're gonna have to shoot someone, they're gonna do it.
They're gonna do it.
Yeah. You put me in the ring, like I'm gonna go in the street. I'm not gonna punch someone, but you put me in the ring, I'm not gonna punch someone. Like it's just circumstances.
Well, it's just you're right. But I've literally even heard people be like, they can't hold the rifle, and I'm like, you're an idiot. That doesn't make any sense.
Like, what?
Yeah,
you can't hold it.
I know, it's so stupid. I know.
That's very funny. Like, is my uterus like preventing me from like controlling my arms now?
It's
like
so dumb. I'm just like anyone.
It's very interesting. I'd love to hear that person's take on feminine biology.
This was a long time
ago. That must be a blast.
I can't remember who they are. Anyway, it's just that's some of the conversations I've had with people. I'm just like, you have no idea what you're talking about, and you make that abundantly clear by saying these things. And again, it's a terrible point, but children use weapons. And they do, and it's awful, but it's true. Anyway,
and they're good at it. This is why they're being exploited.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Anyway, I don't want to go down that one. That's a bad rabbit hole to go down. Anyway, so what I wanted to kind of move towards this one is Somalia, and how you use it, how it's all connected. People can read about that in the book. What I want to do is what I think, as an academic, what you were trying to do in the book. I don't want to speak for you, but I think I got the sense that you use Somalia to show that this isn't just a gendered issue. There are all toxicity. I was going to use the word poison, toxic. It's all good. It's
no.
Rotten to the core, basically. But they tried to use Somalia as an example of how it wasn't. Now, can you just talk about that really briefly? Because it involves the Airborne Regiment, which a lot of people know about, but not really.
Okay, so let's go to the basic. The Airborne Regiment was... The reason for which I'm including this is because the Airborne Regiment was not an isolated unit within the military. It was a unit that was fed by the three infantry regiments. Yeah, infantry artillery. Sometimes it just like goes over my head, and I'm a bad military historian for that. But anyways,
the three regular
like the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, the 22nd Regiment or Vendoux, and the Royal Canadian Regiment. So the people would like come in, do a 3-year tour, and like it could be anyone. When I mean could be anyone, it's like both non-commissioned members and officers. And what happened throughout time is that the airborne started being sacrificed. And I'm not saying that like boohoo for them, but like they became the target of budget cuts and downgrade in the chain of command. So before the commander, the commanding officer used to be a colonel in 1984. He becomes a colonel. I don't delve into like those details in my book because otherwise that would have been like a 400 pages book, and I had a thesis to finish. But because of that, like it specifically, so it was composed of 3 commandos, and the one that led to the torture to death of Shida Aaron is the 2nd Commando, and the 2nd Commando was very notorious for presence of white supremacist, systemic in this discipline issues. And I say systemic because it's like you go back to years and years, like even a decade before Somalia, like everyone had issues. So, some of them were able to like keep a tight on that, like really screw them in and like. But so and part of it is because like the officers most of the time were rotating, but the non-commissioned members were allowed to stay for longer. And so that created like a really big group cohesion where, because it was a prestige unit, it was like there was that idea of like we're the better unit. We are, and so every time there was a new officer or a new second in command, a new senior non-commissioned member, chief warrant officer and warrant officer, these were external people, and so like that bred further indiscipline. But the thing is that like the people, at some point, the people that like were in the airborne would go back to the institution, and they would to the other units, and they would go up the chain of command, and because of that, obviously that's gonna breed everything out, because like toxic attitudes, whether you see them in a specific subset of the unit, they're gonna continue out throughout the organization. And when you have an organization also that allows those disciplinary issues to completely feed off each other, you cannot say, well, it's just the case for this unit, but like there was so many like commanding officers that were rotating in and out, and they were not able to deal with this issue. So you cannot say just like, oh, it's just one unit, because the Canadian military is so small. The military is very small, so like nothing happens in a vacuum. So this is why I look at it, because I'm like, here's the most extreme example that you can find in the Canadian Army, and you cannot look at this in isolation, because they are forcibly organizational makeup that led to this.
And that kind of leads me to the point where I wanted to talk about the thesis exactly, or sorry, more explicitly, in terms of there's like always a saying for these things, right? Like it's like a fish stinks from the head. The leadership is the ones at fault here. They are the one who set the tone. Like I mean, I got that from the book, but I was just like, when you like just said it, I was like, yeah, of course, it makes so much sense. Like it's just, this is rotten from the top for all kinds of reasons that you explain so very well in the book. Again, people can check it out there when it comes out, or you can pre-order it now. It makes sense, right? That this problem, like you just said, how it gets created, right? And then you throw the gender integration element into this already, as you say, this decade that is so much going on, so many issues. It's going to be a perfect storm of awfulness, and that's exactly what happens. And again, just the Airborne Regiment, which, I mean, it's whatever, it's gone. I don't think it's ever coming back. It's gone,
but the problem is that like it was done in 95, but then like you have problems that continued and that continue to this day. Like it's something that I want to, like, my next project actually, once I get some rest from work, because like working full-time and being a researcher is difficult, but it's to look at what happened after Somalia, and did we learn the right lessons, and like did it actually, like, did Afghanistan led us to a path where we reverted back on some of our teaching, because everyone bases the lessons of Somalia on military education. And I'm like, you guys are like just learning one part of the lesson. But to go back to the leadership being rotten at the top, it's an argument, like it's conversation that I have with, weirdly enough, like the people who make themselves responsible for it. So a lot of people are telling me, no, the problem is middle management. So like people, major, lieutenant colonel, or like when you look at the NCM levels, you would look at the warrant officer, chief warrant officer, that and Navy equivalent that I cannot remember on the top of my head. And it's like, no, because like if you don't give them the resources and the incentives to do the work that they need to do to create a very positive work environment, well, they can't. And I'm pretty sure that a lot of them try. But if people don't trust, and it's something that we see in the scandal of sexual misconduct that we have seen over 2021, is that if people don't trust their general officers, generally they're not going to trust like their commanding officer, and it just like crashes down. And I find it very ironic that in such a hierarchical institution as the military, like, well, you cannot blame the senior officers for that. You need to blame the captain and the major and the lieutenant colonel. And I'm like,
no,
really, like this is no, like those people like don't really have the power to do much. They have power within their own units, and I talk about the case of Commander Dean Marsaw. You can completely create like an absolute toxic environment as a commanding officer, but when it comes to further integration and dealing with some disciplinary issues, like what happened with Paul Melno. He was trying his best to deal with the indiscipline. And what happened? Instead of receiving the full-on support of his brigadier general and the major general above him, he got kicked out.
Yep.
Because he was too extreme. And the special forces wanted to deploy the regiment and the battle group at all costs. And it's like, well, then you were complicit into this. And Paul Melno, you can say that he was a bad commanding officer, but he tried to talk to you about this, and he didn't get the resources that he needed. He needed your full support, and he didn't get it. Yeah. And these are the dynamics. Obviously, you need to put the agency in the commanding officers because they have power. They have a lot of discretion into the thing, but you cannot see them once again in a vacuum.
Right.
You cannot see them outside of the organizational structure, out of the relationship that they have with their flag officers above them, and the resources that they have. And this is part of the problem also with equity, diversity, and integration of minorities, is that they do not have the tool to deal with it. So a lot of the time, it falls on the minority to integrate themselves. And it's like, well, that shouldn't be how it works.
Right. I mean, that's, yeah. That hits the nail on the head there. I mean, it's just, it's so, it's not new. This has been going on forever. It's always blame the person below you. It's never my fault. They didn't do what I said right or whatever. I mean, this goes on and on and on.
And an argument that I put onto people is like, well, it's on you if they did not understand your order.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, that's a very basic military.
There's always a reason for which someone is not going to follow an order. Sometimes it's because, like, yeah, they don't agree with that.
Yeah.
But then it's your problem to deal with that. But it's also like, they might not have the resources. They might not have the incentive to do it. Your order might be like completely out of sight with the reality of this unit. But once again, it's on you to make sure that they're doing it.
Yeah, exactly.
And this is what a good leader is, unfortunately, and this is the difficulty.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same story in a different pile, I guess, that I've seen in so many different aspects. I see it from tactical down to, admin levels. Like, it's everywhere. It's always pass the blame, which gets nobody anywhere. I mean,
and this is why I talk about culture. Yeah. Like, you see variations across occupations and across units, because like you have subcultures and stuff like that. But if you look at the bigger picture, you have like those recurring themes, right? And the more I'm immersed in the defense community, it's also part of a larger Canadian bureaucracy culture. In a way, you cannot look at all, and especially in the 1990s. When you look at World War II and World War I, it's a little bit different because the military was not unified and civilized the way that it is today. But in the 1990s, it's a conversation that is very relevant in the sense of like, well, you're supposed to be unified and you're supposed to be civilized. You cannot have civilians saying it's a military problem. No, it's both of you. It's both of you, and you need to address it hand in hand. Because even though I talk about the consequences on service members specifically in the 1990s,
right?
Civilians are part of this shit show too. They're victims, just like they are complacent in it. And this is the same issue in the military. I mean, Department of National Defense / Canadian Armed Forces too.
Yeah, and I mean, well, you see that now. I mean, that will not this particular moment, because there's been some changes in the government. Still remains to be seen how well they're going to go, because I think it's still too early. I'm talking more like the cabinet level and some of the higher levels. But that leads to the next question of today.
Yep.
I know it's bad. I don't want to ask you that. More of what is the takeaway on how to make this better? Like, say someone's like, Charlotte, you're in charge.
Oh, gosh.
What do you do?
You guys are screwed.
Like, what kind of, like, I don't know, what big 3 or 2 changes would you make?
Oh God. Well, the military is starting to look into this, but the incentive structure, just as simple as that. Like, For example, like the zero tolerance policy around sexual misconduct often leads to commanding officers to hide instances of sexual misconduct, or like even not even addressing them at all. But instead of that, is like, instead of counting like how many incidents happened in your unit, and we're going to judge you on that, is we're going to judge you on how you dealt with them.
Right.
It is, so that one, like, just creating that differentiation would do a lot in incentivizing commanding officers to be more proactive in dealing with those issues. Then I would deal with the grievance system. Out of shape. It shouldn't take that long. You need to have a swift, well-funded system that is there for people. Because what people don't realize is a lot of the time, people go to the media because they don't trust their chain of command. They don't trust that the grievance system is going to do it for them.
Right.
And so if instead of like the military, there was a story in 2020 where they were like investigating into clamping down more on leakages. I'm like, no. You're getting the problem completely wrong. It's like, you need a whistleblower system. You need an effective grievance system. And as we're talking about increasing the defense budget, I would make the argument, please put money in this. I know that the Canadian military like needs capabilities to like face the new 21st century war. But like, holy moly, guys, if you don't want to lose any more people, do that. And then finally is, oh my God, putting in place a recommendation by Deschamps to put an external monitoring body. And I'm working on a paper right now that I'm trying to convince my work to publish, but it doesn't seem to be very exciting to the people I work with. So, but I'm working on it. We have an ombudsman that proposed a bill that would help him do that. And so I'm just like, hey, why don't we debate that bill, pass it, give the resources for the ombudsman to become like that grand guru of like looking at all those personal issues, all personnel issues through the grievance system, and table reports yearly to Parliament. And then and maybe a thought point is that we really need to like shake up our government. We operate on a system of ministerial responsibility. When it comes to sexual misconduct, I haven't seen it. And it's about managing the fires and stuff like that, but I'm sorry, when you have a fire, you need to deal with it, and Sajan should have been fired. The problem is that I'm not convinced that it was a problem of Sajan being incompetent. I think that it's a problem of how we view the role of the minister in national defense that leads to a problem of accountability. And I think that we really need to grapple with that beyond academia, because you have wonderful academics that are dealing with this. More specifically, Philip Lagasse at Carleton University. He's fantastic about this. But once again, like, we have such a hard time, academics have such a hard time convincing authorities, both at the Department of National Defense side, then like at the PMO or the Privy Council, that nothing is happening. And this is kind of like where I'm going forward with this, is I want to find a way to convince, because I think that we're not speaking on the same terms. So how do you do that? How do you, like, I have those ideas. How do I convince those in power that this will serve them, and for them to actually pursue them?
Yeah, that's a tough fight.
Well, I'm young and fit, so I'm gonna do that until I get tired.
Yeah.
I guess.
I mean, I agree. It's just from all the the studying and all the research I've done, it's just so difficult. These there we go.
There's her appearance.
There we go.
So how do you think about this? Yeah, no, she's not
No,
convinced.
she's got other things to think about, other kitten things. What was I going to say? I got distracted by the cat. Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, just it's so difficult to change these things, but it doesn't mean it needs to be done. It 100% needs to be done. Because again, I said the same thing with Kelly. It's just we had the same discussion at the end. I'm just like, what do you do? Right? Do you burn it down? Start again? Do you clean house? Like, do you purge everybody? Like,
Do you
what
know
do you?
that gif of Elmo in front of fires and he has his rant? Like this is exactly that, burn it to the ground.
Yeah. I mean, I like, because I said the same thing on that one. It's like you said, you mentioned earlier, there's probably not going to be a world war at the drop of a hat because that's just not how it happens. But a war could break out, right? So if you can't just get rid of everybody because then people will die. Like it doesn't work that way.
No.
So it's a difficult thing, right? Because the military has a purpose. The military purpose is to fight a war. Like that is to fight. That's the point, right? That's undeniable. They're there to fight. But how you go about doing that is still very difficult to figure out how to do it in the best way as society changes, because that is happening whether people want it to or not. It doesn't really matter because it's still happening. It's interesting because, well, Scott's not watching anymore, but he made it a point. I agree. I think by the way we were talking about it, I think it misunderstood maybe what I was trying to say. He's saying that maybe we were maybe alluding that peacetime militaries need different standards. That's not what I was saying.
No, they operate differently.
Yeah, well, they operate differently in how they think about things. What I was saying is they should be on that war thinking like, we need everybody we can get. We should be looking at different people for different things. Why is that so bad? I'm not saying Scott did not say that. But people
it's a conversation that I was trying to have, actually, weirdly enough, before the sexual misconduct scandals exploded. Oh my god, my cat is getting her head stuck in my cup. Sorry.
Yeah.
But we haven't been able to convince them that diversity is needed.
Yeah.
Like we have made all the operational effectiveness arguments about this.
Yeah.
It's still not enough.
Yeah.
And so like what I came to think of, and I'm talking from like someone that has done a lot of therapy for my mental health, but the military, at least in Canada, is extremely insecure. And so what it is doing right now is doing stuff that goes against its own interest.
100%.
And so because of that, like they're doing stuff like, we need to keep as many people as we can, because like otherwise we're screwed. But they retain the wrong people.
Yeah.
They tend to retain. They're like, sometimes they lead to being enablers, because they don't want to lose that person. And it's like, well, no, at some point you will have to understand that risk needs to be there, and you need to embrace that risk of like, if people don't jump on and follow the culture change that you want to have, the values, or like agree to behave according to the values that you preach, because like there's another conversation to be had about whether or not you can change someone's values, but at least that their behavior matches the military's values, you need to kick them out.
Yep.
You cannot promote them.
Yeah, I agree.
And the promote our sideline approach of the military is kind of breeding toxicity too, because like who do you promote? And usually we also promote only people that are in the combat arms, and like at the higher level of flag officers, we could also gain from having people from non-traditional backgrounds, like people in logistics, people in health, because they have a different understanding of war and combat and stuff like that. And let's be honest, like it's not the chief of the defense staff that writes all the plan for all the wars, right? They get briefed. So it's like all of this. This is why I talk about a culture change. It needs to be overhauled. It's not just like dealing with sexual misconduct. It's such a bigger problem.
Oh, 100%. I mean, yeah, like that's your book. It's not, it's gender integration. Yes, that is the book, but it's not. It's so much more, and that's a good thing, because you need a way in, right? You always need a way in, and this is the way in. What I wanted to say, and I know this is completely unrealistic. I know the culture is, I've said this before, is still broken. I get worked up, but I take it down to like a base level, and especially for what we've been talking today, with the whole, machismo part of this. Someone who's working logistics doesn't need to be, a 6'6" ripped dude who's always at the gym and is angry all the time. We don't need that in the military.
I know. And this is why, like, it's a conversation that I had with my boss a couple weeks ago that was fascinating to me. I mean, because I'm a nerd about that, but we don't need the military to embrace those hard warrior ethos ideas throughout the organization. Most of the military are actually bureaucrats in uniform. And that's okay. That's okay. Like,
it's not a bad thing.
That's perfectly fine, because the military needs a bureaucracy, and actually you need a bigger bureaucracy than you need troops on the ground, because without the bureaucracy, without that logistics, but you need to have those subcultures that actually enable every part of the military to help itself. So, as you said, you don't need a jack. And even I would say, like, even in combat arms, you don't need a jacket up to get the job done. Look at rugby. You see, like, how different rugby teams, like, have people of different size and body shape and with different skills. And this is what makes it work. To create cohesion, you don't need, like, just, like, people that just look like you.
Yeah,
because
100%.
And also, it's boring.
Oh, well, yeah, it's 100. That's what I always say. I'm like, same viewpoint. I'm like, I don't care anymore. Just stop listening. Just to use the rugby example, I played football like when I was in high school, and I played at a pretty higher level, and I got blown up by some pretty small dudes. Like, they hit me just as hard, and I'm like, was not expecting that.
Because they were so legs.
Yeah, oh yeah, he took my legs out. I was literally gonna say when I said I didn't see that coming, because I literally didn't see them coming.
Stealthy.
Oh yeah, very stealthy. But Keith earlier made a good point. I just didn't have a point to fit it in. But this is about the physicality, which is true. Like, there are certain physical things, but again, it doesn't matter what a gender identity is. But the point I wanted to make, and this is nothing new, right? Because again, I focus on the world wars a lot. The lesson is most of the people in the military were nowhere going near the front line. They're in the back, making sure those at the front line need what they need. They can
and they didn't die immediately or like from a disease. And also, like, funnily enough, like, we have those hyper masculine ideas of wars, but like, people in 1914, they don't look like what we imagine the perfect warrior to be like today. And when we talk about victory on the battlefield, we're not like, look how ripped Robert was. It's like, no, like, look at how all the moving parts worked seamlessly. And as you said, who does that? People behind the front lines. Not to deny the fact that the people on the front line, like, did the hardest work, because like, they were putting their lives on the line, and a lot of them died. But it's, of course, she put something, she rolled, and like, some stuff fell off my desk, and then she scared herself.
Of course, they did. Yeah, I can't do that.
She's a kitten. She's getting used to it. But absolutely, it's like, it's funny, because the military is actually, like, in terms of occupation, trades, and like what you need to get the job done, is actually fairly diverse.
100%.
So why aren't you, like, embracing that also in terms of demographics? And people have different understanding of everything, and that's what makes it really cool.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, it just makes it better. I mean, I always say, like, I made this other argument for other things. You can't take emotion out, but if you want to try and strip it down, it would just make the military better. Again, I don't want some roided up, jacked out, crazy guy who's going to want to, kill everyone he's working with doing logistics. That doesn't make any sense. Like, why would you want that? You need someone who knows what they're doing. I don't care what.
That person in logistics can be like a gym buff, but that is not the inherent, like, we don't need an army full of Rambos to work. And it's a conversation that I was trying to have on Twitter, but I was mind-splained about the Taliban and why they won in Afghanistan. But look at Afghanistan, look at Vietnam, look at Korea, look at Algeria. Like, Western militaries that were starting to, like, promote a hyper-masculine ideas of fighting get their asses handed to them. So we were proven time and time again and more recently in 2021, in August 2021, that like this doesn't work.
Yeah, we're doing something very wrong.
We're doing something very wrong, and we're seeing that also with the Russian military today, where it's like they were promoting this hyper masculine ideas of its military,
That was
and
really
then
weird.
you have Ukraine, like you have Igor the farmer, like just taking tanks.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's just, I guess that's probably a good place to kind of wrap up. That's what I think, right? It makes perfect sense, right? It's not what you think. And also, well, this is just another military thing. Why are you playing the game your enemy wants you to play? It makes no sense. Who cares what they think? I'm not going to take my cues from them. That's just dumb. That doesn't matter what they are.
Russia thinks that we're too feminist.
Okay.
Well, that's their problem. Like
Well,
that won't change. That shouldn't change my life. Like it's funny. Like, are we getting ourselves being bullied? Like into not like having our militaries be smarter and more creative and more innovative. It's kind of like mind blowing to me.
Well, it's just, that's your work, right? That's your book. It's this, like you said, it's the culture, right? It's this top down problem that just feeds itself. Well, both ways, right? Like you said, the Airborne, again, just perfect example, right? It goes up and down, right? Because people move out, come in. It's the same. It's both ways.
Toxicity breeds toxicity, and it's kind of like, how do you break this loop? And breaking that loop comes from the top.
Yeah, I think that's what it's going to take. Well, this is actually a good point from Keith too. And
oh, absolutely. I mean,
100%.
Like look at war movies and how they evolved, like since like the 60s, from the 70s, and then like boom, you have Sylvester Stallone coming into the mix, and it's like, wait a second, man. Like, yeah, like Rambo, I'm pretty sure it's a cool movie, but like,
it's okay. Well, I was going to say, yeah, just again, it's an American example, but again, Audie Murphy, he was not a large man. He was a very small man. He's the most decorated soldier in U.S. history. Like, I'm not even joking. Like, he literally won, I think, every medal that they gave out. He was a small guy, and by no means was he, brazen. Everyone knew him. He was quiet. He was not these, hyper masculine. And he was the best soldier they had. Like, it's just, I was going to say earlier too, like with the whole masculinity and now, like if that's whoever's pulling that trigger, that's still pulling that trigger. If it's got pink, fake nails on it, that bullet's still going. So, I mean,
what you should worry about is like, okay, can we have rifles that work well?
Yep, that's what we should be worrying about.
Yeah, and like whether or not like the person that is pulling the trigger is wearing a bra or not. Like, who fucking cares?
Yeah, who cares? As long as a bullet pulled by anybody pulling that trigger, you're still going to get killed by it. And there's a cheery note to end
I mean,
on,
if they target well.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, there's always luck too.
There's some stuff that I'm like ready to accept, like for the fact that I could never become a pilot because my eyesight is absolute shit.
Yeah, me too.
That's normal, but like,
yeah, again, it's like you said,
are like just like, okay, I cannot do that. Like, I cannot get into GTF2 because I need to have the same performance, like physical performance qualification than a man that has been like bodybuilding for 15 years. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, but again, like you said, it's a cultural thing. I think conversations like this help as long as we keep talking about it and keep shoving it in people's faces. I think that makes a difference.
Yeah.
How else can you do it, really? And coming on different ways and doing that is great. Like, this is why I like doing this stuff, because it's a different way of doing it, and it's not just a book that sits on a shelf after its initial release forever. So thanks again for coming on. I really appreciate it, and let me get a peek at the book. Like you said, I think you said it was the first one outside your circle to read it, so that was great.
Yeah, no. I mean, at first I was like, why did I volunteer myself to do this? I mean,
I told you it was going to be easy.
but I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. And I mean, obviously it's a discussion that I'm fascinated about. And just having those conversations and I love having those conversations with people who don't know about this history, who actually like don't always have those conversations. That's what I want to do. I want people, like, I want that book to be accessible to anyone who have even the tiniest interest into all of this, because I think it's important for everyone to have an idea. I'm not saying that my book is like absolutely 100% right. I missed a lot of stuff.
Well, but happens with any book.
In like, it's just triggering that conversation and have everyone being willing to have it is so important to me. And if I can help push the button, then that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think that is cool. And we got people watching, and more will watch when this is over. So that's always good. Again, not to toot my own horn, but people will watch it. But I think because it's an important thing that we need to do, right? We need to talk about it. We need to talk about things that are uncomfortable. I mean, history shouldn't be comfortable, as people.
And this is why I love Canadian military history. I mean, history in general, but Canadian military history so much is that, like, it explains so much about you guys as a country. Like, to me, helped me like process a lot of stuff and better understand Canada as a country. And I think that's pretty neat. Just like sit down and think about it, and it's shaping us in more ways than not, both individually and as a society, for sure.
Oh, 100%. Completely agree. That's kind of why I do what I do, because I think it is so important. We try to pretend it's not, but it doesn't work that way. You can pretend all we want.
Yeah, and I really appreciate your work, and I'm pretty sure people in the audience too.
Oh, well, thank you for saying that. I appreciate it. Yeah, so unless you have anything else, that's I'm good. We got worked up enough, so I think we're good. We're almost at an hour and a half.
We had a little bit of a sweat, so that was our work.
Good. You need to do that every now and again.
Talking about working out was enough.
Gotta get the anger out sometimes too. Anyway, I'm just gonna do a quick sign off, and then we'll say goodbye together. So thanks for watching, everyone. I appreciate it. This is a really important topic, like I said. Lots of stuff on there. Again, saying it again because it is a good book. Link in the description. Buy the book, read it when it comes out. It's going to open your mind in a lot of ways. It's going to change some perceptions. It's going to shake things up, which is what we need. And Susan, yeah, great. Follow Charlotte on Twitter. She's on there. The link is below. So check all that out. And also, if you do like the channel and aren't yet a patron, please do check that out if you want to help me continue on doing this kind of stuff. It really, really helps. I do need a little bit more help in that area. So if you can spare a couple bucks a month, it does help me, because the more people who do it, the more people do it. It's just these things snowball, as they say. So please do check that out. All the links are below for doing that. And that'll help me. Excuse me, I've been talking for too long here. Will help me. I can see Charlotte laughing at me in the little box. It'll help me just continue on, because I have some big plans coming up. So any help you can provide will be great. And there's more coming towards the end of the month. So just keep an eye out for that. I just don't have the details nailed down yet, but some stuff is coming. So yeah, so just keep in touch. Just keep it up. See, I can't talk by the end of these things. Just check out like social and YouTube as well, because I'll update about what stuff is coming. It should be soon, hopefully early next week. So thanks for coming on, Charlotte. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Maybe we'll have you on another time. We can pick another topic and we can get angry together again.
I would actually love that very much.
All right. So thanks everyone for watching, and see you.